I'm Fiona, 24 female. I work as a museum curator, a job that suits my personality perfectly. I spend my days in quiet halls, surrounded by things that have survived the ravages of time, piecing together stories from fragments of the past. My life is one of order, of careful cataloging and quiet contemplation. My family, on the other hand, is a masterpiece of chaos disguised as perfection. From the outside, we were the ideal family. Richard, the successful financial advisor, Linda, the interior designer with an impeccable home, and their two daughters. One was Jessica, the radiant 18-year-old sun around which our family solar system revolved. The other was me. For years, I told myself that my role as the quiet, overlooked planet was a choice. I preferred the shadows, they were safer. But the truth is, you can't choose your orbit when you're caught in the gravitational pull of a star like my sister. My parents were her willing astronomers, tracking her every move, celebrating her every sparkle, while I was just a distant point of light they occasionally remembered was there. This year's family reunion was supposed to be a celebration of Jessica's high school graduation and her acceptance into a prestigious university. But for me, it became the moment the silence of space was finally broken by the deafening sound of impact. It was the moment I realized that sometimes the only way to survive is to break orbit and become your own universe. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The family reunion was held at our grandparents' old lake house, a sprawling cedar and stone relic that my parents had inherited and aggressively renovated. My mother, Linda, had stripped away its rustic charm, replacing it with a sterile palette of gray, white, and chrome. It felt less like a home and more like a showroom, a stage for the perfect family to perform their annual play. Every summer, aunts, uncles, and cousins would descend upon the property for a weekend of forced smiles and carefully curated fun. This year felt different, heavier. The air was thick with the cloying sweetness of Jessica's success. Banners congratulating her were strung between the birch trees, and every conversation seemed to circle back to her brilliant future. My father, Richard, played his part as the proud patriarch with practiced ease. He stood by the massive stainless steel grill flipping burgers with a theatrical flair, his booming laughter echoing across the manicured lawn. He was a financial advisor, a man who built his life on the illusion of stability and control. He managed portfolios worth millions, yet he seemed utterly incapable of managing the emotional economy of his own family. He saw in Jessica a reflection of his own ambition, a high-yield investment that was about to pay dividends. I, on the other hand, was a safe, low-risk bond, reliable, unassuming, and offering no spectacular returns. I was the curator, the quiet preserver of things, while Jessica was the celebrated creator of her own dazzling narrative. My mother floated through the crowd, her smile as bright and hard as the quartz countertops in her kitchen. She was a high-end interior designer, and her entire life was a project of aesthetic perfection. She de-designed our family to be admired, not understood. Any scuff mark, any emotional stain, was to be polished away before guests arrived. When she looked at Jessica, her eyes shone with the pride of a master artist admiring her magnum opus. When she looked at me, her gaze was functional, checking to see if I was properly dressed, if my presence complemented the overall decor. I had learned long ago not to bring my messy, uncurated feelings into her pristine world. My sister Jessica was the undisputed queen of the event. At 18, she possessed a casual cruelty that she disguised as confidence. She was beautiful, intelligent, and popular, a trifecta of genetic and social fortune that made her seem untouchable. She moved through the party with the grace of a predator, her laughter sharp, her wit sharper. People were drawn to her, blinded by her light, never noticing the heat that scorched anyone who got too close. I watched her from the periphery, as I always did, nursing a lukewarm glass of iced tea on the deck. I saw the way she charmed our uncle into a bigger graduation check, the way she subtly insulted our cousin's dress while pretending to compliment it. She was a master of social manipulation, and my parents were her most devoted disciples. The only person who seemed to see through the facade was our paternal grandmother, Sophia. At 78, she was a retired historian, a woman who understood that the real stories are often found in the margins, not the headlines. She sat in a wicker chair under the shade of a large oak tree, her gaze missing nothing. She saw the tension in my shoulders, the forced quality of my smile. Earlier in the day, she had taken my hand, her touch papery and warm. "History remembers the quiet ones, too, Fiona," she'd whispered, her eyes knowing. "They're the ones who write it down." Her words were a small anchor in the turbulent sea of family dynamics. As the afternoon sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn, the younger cousins decided to go for a swim. Jessica, ever the ringleader, herded them towards the dock. I had no intention of joining them. I was never a strong swimmer, a fact Jessica knew well. A childhood scare involving a public pool had left me with a deep-seated fear of deep water. I preferred the solid ground, the predictable and the known. I was content to sit on the edge of the dock, my feet dangling just above the surface, watching the others splash and shout. My parents were on the deck with the other adults, their conversation a low murmur punctuated by bursts of laughter. They had a clear view of the dock, of everything that was about to happen. Jessica, dripping and energized from the water, swam over to the dock. She hoisted herself up, her movements sleek and athletic. "What's the matter, Fi?" she asked, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Too good to swim with the rest of us?" I shook my head, offering a small smile. "You know I'm not a fan of the water, Jess." "Oh, right," she said, her smile turning into a smirk. "The drama from when you were a kid. You're 24, Fiona. Don't you think it's time to get over it?" Before I could answer, she was behind me. I felt her hands on my back, firm and decisive. The world tilted. One moment, I was sitting on the solid wood of the dock, the next, I was airborne. The push wasn't playful, it was forceful, deliberate. There was a collective gasp from the cousins in the water, followed by a sudden, shocked silence. Then, the cold shock of the lake enveloped me. The weight of the water was immediate and suffocating. It filled my nose and mouth, my clothes dragging me down like a lead blanket. My feet scrambled for purchase, but found only empty, dark water. Panic, cold and sharp, seized my chest. My lungs burned. I flailed, my arms slapping uselessly at the surface. My head broke through for a second and I gasped for air, choking on a mouthful of water. In that brief, terrifying moment, my eyes found my family. My cousins were frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and fear. On the deck, my parents, Richard and Linda, stood motionless. They were watching. Their faces were not alarmed, not concerned. They were just watching, as if I were a character in a television show who had just met a predictable, slightly amusing fate. Then I saw Jessica. She was standing on the edge of the dock, her head thrown back, laughing. It wasn't a giggle, it was a full-throated, triumphant laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had just proven a point, who had just won a game only she was playing. Through my sputtering and gasping, I heard her voice, clear and sharp, carry across the water. "Don't be so dramatic," she called out, a smirk playing on her lips. "It's just water." My parents just stood there, silent. Their silence was worse than the push, worse than the laughter. It was a verdict. In that moment, as I struggled to breathe, I understood my true place in the family. I was not the quiet daughter. I was the disposable one. A cousin eventually helped me to the edge of the dock, and I dragged myself out, shivering and humiliated. The party continued around me as if nothing had happened, but everything had. The water had washed away the last of my illusions. I didn't say a word. I didn't cry or scream. I just went inside, changed into dry clothes, and began to make a plan. The performance was over. It was time for the curator to close the exhibit. The drive home was a 2-hour-long study in silence. I sat in the back of my father's luxury sedan, the scent of damp lake water clinging to my hair and clothes like a shroud. I had wrapped myself in an old towel, but a deep, unshakable chill had settled into my bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Through the rearview mirror, I could see my parents' faces, illuminated by the rhythmic sweep of passing streetlights. Richard's jaw was set, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Linda stared out her passenger window, her reflection a ghostly mask of indifference. They weren't angry, not at me, not at Jessica. Their silence felt like a carefully constructed wall, designed to keep any unpleasantness from breaching the perimeter of their comfortable world. Jessica sat beside me, scrolling through her phone, completely absorbed. Occasionally, a smirk would flicker across her face as she typed, probably recounting her hilarious prank to her friends. To her, the incident was already a piece of disposable social media content, a funny story to be told at school on Monday. For me, it was a defining moment, a stark, ugly photograph that would be permanently burned into my memory. When we finally pulled into the driveway of our meticulously landscaped suburban home, the silence broke, but the words that filled it were worse. "Fiona, go take a hot shower. You don't want to catch a cold," my mother said as she got out of the car. Her tone was the same when she used to remind me to take out the recycling, practical, devoid of emotion, a simple instruction to solve a logistical problem. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened. There was no, "Are you okay?" No, "I can't believe your sister did that." There was only the quiet hum of the engine and the implicit command to erase the event, to wash it down the drain along with the lake water. My father was already unloading the cooler from the trunk, his movements stiff and efficient. "We'll talk about this in the morning," he said without looking at me. It was his classic move, the deferment of conflict. He managed crises by scheduling them for a later date, hoping that by the time the appointment arrived, the issue would have resolved itself, or, more likely, been forgotten. I didn't answer them. I walked into the house, up the pristine staircase to my room, and closed the door. The house, usually a source of quiet comfort, felt alien and hostile. Every perfectly placed vase and artfully arranged cushion seemed to mock me. It was a house of surfaces, and I had just discovered there was nothing beneath them. I stood under the spray of the hot shower for a long time, not just to get warm, but to try and wash away the feeling of humiliation, the feeling of absolute worthlessness that had clung to me since I'd been pulled from the water. But it was a stain that went deeper than my skin. The physical act of being pushed was shocking, but the emotional ripple effect was devastating. It was the casual cruelty from Jessica, yes, but it was the silent complicity from my parents that truly broke me. Their inaction was an action. It was a choice. They had chosen to watch me struggle, to prioritize Jessica's amusement over my safety and well-being. They had chosen her, as they always had, and in doing so, they had shown me that I was on my own. The next morning, my father's promised talk was a masterclass in emotional evasion. I found him in the kitchen, reading the financial news on his tablet, a cup of coffee steaming at his elbow. He looked up as I entered, his expression one of mild irritation, as if I were an inconvenient market fluctuation he had to deal with before the opening bell. "Fiona," he began, folding his hands on the table. "About yesterday, your sister was out of line. It was a silly prank that went too far." He said the words, but they were hollow, stripped of any genuine sentiment. They were the words of a man reading from a script, trying to get through an unpleasant scene as quickly as possible. "It wasn't a prank, Dad," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "She pushed me. She laughed. You and Mom just stood there." He sighed, a sound of deep exasperation. "Fiona, let's not blow this out of proportion. It was a family reunion. Everyone was in high spirits. Jessica gets exuberant. You know how she is. She didn't mean any real harm. She didn't mean any real harm." The words hung in the air between us, a monument to his denial. I had been fighting for air, my lungs burning, and he was dismissing it as youthful exuberance. My mother joined the conversation then, gliding into the kitchen looking flawless in her morning yoga attire. "Your father is right, dear," she said, her voice smooth and placating. "The last thing we need is a big drama right before Jessica's graduation party next month. Let's just put this behind us. Family is about forgiveness, after all." Family is about forgiveness. But what they meant was that I should forgive. Forgiveness was a one-way street in our house, always flowing from me to Jessica. She was never expected to apologize, never held accountable for her actions. My role was to absorb, to forgive, and to forget, ensuring the smooth operation of the family machine. I looked from my father's dismissive face to my mother's polished smile and saw them for what they were. Not parents, but managers. They were the managers of brand Jessica, and I was just an unfortunate bit of negative press that needed to be handled. The conversation was over. They had delivered their verdict. I was guilty of being dramatic, of failing to appreciate Jessica's exuberant personality. I was guilty of disrupting the carefully constructed piece of their perfect world. I retreated to my room, the silence returning, but this time it felt different. It was no longer the oppressive silence of being ignored. It was the focused, productive silence of a library, of an archive. It was my silence. In that room, surrounded by my books and the quiet artifacts of my own life, the ripples the lake incident began to settle. The turbulent, emotional water clarified, and I could see the bottom. And at the bottom was a hard, undeniable truth. I had been trying to earn love and respect from people who were incapable of giving it to me. I had been playing a game that was rigged from the start. The only way to win was not to play. The lake incident was not the end of a story. It was the beginning. It was the catalyst, the spark that lit a long, slow-burning fuse. As I sat there, the chill in my bones was finally replaced by something else. A cold, calm, and utterly clear sense of purpose. They thought I was dramatic. They had no idea what drama really was. The weeks following the reunion were a strange sort of purgatory. On the surface, life returned to its normal, placid rhythm. My parents acted as if the lake incident had never happened, a collective amnesia settling over the household. They were masters of selective memory, curating the family history to include only the flattering portraits and hiding the ugly candids in the attic of their minds. They doubled down on their preparations for Jessica's upcoming graduation party, an event that was quickly escalating into the social event of the season. My mother was consumed with caterers and floral arrangements, while my father boasted to anyone who would listen about the prestigious business school Jessica would be attending in the fall. Their obsession with her future was all-encompassing, a dazzling light that cast the rest of us into deeper shadow. Jessica, for her part, was more insufferable than ever. She floated through the house on a cloud of entitlement, basking in the glow of her parents' adoration. She never apologized, never even acknowledged what she had done. To her, I was an irrelevant piece of furniture she had accidentally bumped into. She didn't see me as a person with feelings. She saw me as an obstacle to her own amusement. I played my part, becoming a ghost in my own home. I was quiet, compliant, and invisible. I went to my job at the museum, finding solace in the silent, dusty halls of the archives. There, surrounded by history, I felt a sense of perspective. I handled artifacts that had survived wars, famines, and the slow decay of centuries. My own small tragedy felt insignificant in comparison, yet the injustice of it burned with a steady, low heat. My parents mistook my silence for acquiescence. They thought I had accepted my role, that I had forgiven and forgotten as instructed. They saw a quiet daughter, not a calculating one. They saw compliance, not contempt. They had no idea that behind my placid expression, a revolution was brewing. I was observing, I was listening, and I was planning. My only true ally was my grandmother, Sophia. I called her a few days after the incident, needing to hear a voice that wasn't filtered through the lens of Jessica's deification. I didn't have to explain much. She had seen it all with her own sharp eyes. "I saw it, Fiona," she said, her voice crackling over the phone line. "I saw them watch. I am so sorry." Hearing those words, simple, honest acknowledgement, was like a dam breaking inside me. I finally let myself cry, not for the humiliation of the push, but for the profound loneliness of being utterly unprotected by the two people who were supposed to protect me most. "They don't see me, Grandma," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "They never have." "Oh, they see you, child," she replied, her voice firm. "They see a quiet, capable young woman who doesn't cause them any trouble. They see convenience. They have taken your strength for granted for far too long." There was a pause, and then she said something that would become the cornerstone of my resolve. "Your great-grandfather, my father, always said you can't expect people to value you more than they value their own comfort. Your parents are very, very comfortable. Don't ever forget that." Her words echoed in my mind for days. My parents weren't just silent onlookers, they were silent accomplices. Their comfort depended on Jessica's happiness and my compliance. Any disruption to that delicate balance was a threat. My pain, my fear, my humiliation, these were inconveniences to be managed and dismissed, not problems to be solved. My father, the financial advisor, managed his emotional portfolio the same way he managed his clients' money, by minimizing risk and maximizing predictable returns. Jessica was his blue-chip stock, and I was the municipal bond he kept in the file and forgot about. My mother, the interior designer, saw me as a flaw in her perfect design, a color that didn't quite match the palette. It was easier to ignore the flaw than to redesign the whole room. This realization was both devastating and liberating. It was devastating to accept that my parents' love was so conditional, so shallow. But it was liberating to know that I no longer had to try and earn it. The burden of seeking their approval, a weight I had carried my entire life, simply vanished. I was free. The final piece of my resolve clicked into place during a family dinner a week before Jessica's party. My father was holding forth on the staggering cost of Jessica's university. "But it's the best investment we could possibly make," he said, beaming at Jessica. "We've been putting money into her college fund since the day she was born. She'll want for nothing." My mother nodded in agreement. "Only the best for our girl," Jessica preened under the praise. "I can't wait to decorate my dorm room," she said. "I'm going to need a pretty big budget for that, Mom." "Whatever you need, darling," Linda cooed. I sat there, pushing a piece of broccoli around my plate, and a thought, cold and sharp as an icicle, pierced through my mind. Her college fund. My father had always been fastidiously secretive about the family finances, treating them with the same confidentiality as his clients' accounts. But I remembered something from long ago, a snippet of conversation I had overheard as a child. It was after my great-grandfather's funeral. My grandmother, Sophia, had been talking to my father about the inheritance. "He left a considerable sum for the girls," she had said. "For both girls, make sure you do right by them, Richard." My father had assured her he would, that he would invest it wisely for their futures. At the time, I hadn't understood. But now, connecting the dots was chillingly simple. The college fund he spoke of with such pride, the one that was solely for Jessica, what if its origins were in the inheritance meant for both of us? The thought was so audacious, so profoundly unfair, that it took my breath away. Was it possible that my parents' emotional neglect was mirrored by a financial one? Had they not only watched me drown emotionally, but also quietly stolen my financial lifeline? The idea took root in the fertile ground of my newfound clarity. It was no longer just about a push into a lake. It was about a lifetime of being sidelined, of being treated as less than. If they had repurposed my inheritance to fuel Jessica's brilliant future while leaving me to fend for myself, it wasn't just neglect. It was theft. The silent accomplices might have been more active than I ever imagined. The museum curator in me, the part that meticulously researches provenance and verifies authenticity, was awakened. I needed to see the records. I needed to follow the paper trail. I needed to uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it was. My quiet investigation was about to begin. My father's office was his sanctuary, a room on the ground floor of our house that was strictly off-limits. It was a space of dark wood, leather-bound books, and the quiet hum of a powerful computer. It was where he managed the fortunes of others and, I suspected, concealed the truths of our own. Gaining access was the first challenge, but my father, for all his professional caution, was a man of habit. He worked late, and every night at precisely 10:00 p.m., he would go to the kitchen to make a cup of chamomile tea before heading up to bed. This 15-minute window was my only opportunity. For 3 nights, I watched him, timing his routine, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. He never locked the office door. He didn't think he needed to. In his mind, his authority was lock enough. He never imagined that his quiet, compliant daughter would ever dare to cross the threshold. On the 4th night, I was ready. I waited in the darkened hallway, listening for the familiar sounds of the kettle whistling and the clink of a spoon against a ceramic mug. As soon as I heard his footsteps on the stairs, I slipped into the office, closing the door behind me with a barely audible click. The room smelled of old paper and leather, the scent of money and secrets. His computer was asleep, a single pulsating light on the tower indicating its dormant power. IS. In his expensive ergonomic chair, the leather sighing under my weight. Now came the second, more difficult challenge, the password. My father was a man who preached about complex, uncrackable passwords to his clients. He wouldn't use something simple like a birthday or a pet's name, but I knew something about my father that his clients didn't. For all his financial acumen, he was a deeply sentimental man about one thing: his own history. He was proud of his first major stock market win, a risky bet on a tech startup in the late 90s that had launched his career. He told the story at every opportunity. The company was called Nova Bright, and he had bought the stock on his 30th birthday, October 25, 1997. I typed it in, Nova Bright 102597. The screen flickered for a moment, and then the desktop bloomed to life. I was in. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. I navigated quickly to his personal finance folders, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The folders were meticulously organized: household expenses, retirement, investments. And there it was, a folder simply labeled education. Inside was a single, password-protected spreadsheet: JG Fund, Jessica's college fund. This was a new barrier, but I was prepared. My father used the same password structure for everything: a word of personal significance followed by a meaningful date. What was as significant as his first big win? His golden child. I tried Jessica with her birthday. Nothing. I tried Princess with her birthday. Nothing. I thought back to the stories he told, the way his face lit up when he talked about her achievements. His favorite story was about her winning the state swimming championship her freshman year. She had broken the record for the 100-meter freestyle. I remembered the time on the plaque she had in her room, 52.14 seconds. The date of the championship was on there too, May 12, 2021. I typed, freestyle 52140-51221. The spreadsheet opened. My breath hitched in my chest. It was a detailed ledger of an investment account dating back nearly 20 years. The initial deposit, made in early 2006, was for $100,000. The memo line read, initial funding from GGF Weston Estate. Great-grandfather Weston, my grandmother Sophia's father. I scrolled through the transactions, my blood turning to ice. The account had been expertly managed, growing steadily through market ups and downs. The current balance was staggering, far more than any standard college fund. It was just shy of $450,000. I kept scrolling, my eyes scanning the notes section my father had meticulously kept. In 2008, there was a note: per estate documents, funds to be divided equally between beneficiaries F and J upon their 25th birthdays. F and J, Fiona and Jessica. My name was right there in black and white. The fund wasn't Jessica's, it was ours. My father had never divided it. He had simply consolidated it into a single account and mentally, and it seemed legally, earmarked it for his favorite daughter. He had been managing my inheritance for my entire life, and not once had he ever mentioned its existence to me. He had let me work part-time jobs through college to pay for my own modest state school tuition. He had lectured me on the importance of saving when I was struggling to make rent on my first apartment. All the while, my money, my future, my security was sitting in this account, being cultivated for the exclusive benefit of my sister. The betrayal was so profound, so cold and calculated, it felt like a physical blow. This wasn't a moment of passive neglect. This was an active, long-term deception. This was the theft of my past and my future. I knew I needed proof. I quickly found the folder where he scanned important documents. Under Estate, I found the original trust documents from my great-grandfather. I read them with the meticulous focus of a curator authenticating a priceless manuscript. The language was clear, unambiguous. The inheritance was to be held in trust and distributed in equal shares to his two great-granddaughters. I saved a copy of the trust document and the entire spreadsheet to a small, encrypted flash drive I had brought with me. I worked silently, methodically, leaving no trace of my presence. I cleared the computer's history of recently opened documents, ejected the drive, and put it safely in my pocket. I looked at the clock. I had been in there for 12 minutes. I took a deep, steadying breath and stood up. I pushed the chair back to its exact original position and slipped out of the office, closing the door with a soft click. I made it back to my room just as I heard my father's footsteps descending the stairs to do his final nightly check of the house. He would walk past his office door, never knowing that the vault had been opened, and its secrets were now in my possession. The weight of the flash drive in my pocket was immense. It was the weight of evidence, of truth, but it also felt like something else, a key, the key to my own cage, and I was about to use it to set myself free. The week leading up to Jessica's graduation party was the longest of my life. I moved through my days in a state of hyper-awareness, every action deliberate and measured. The flash drive felt like a hot coal in my pocket, a constant reminder of the secret I carried and the monumental task that lay ahead. My family noticed nothing. They were too wrapped up in the whirlwind of party preparations. My mother was finalizing seating charts, my father was coordinating the valet parking, and Jessica was agonizing over which of her 2 designer dresses to wear. I was a phantom in the background, quietly observing their frantic energy, my own plans moving forward with the silent, inexorable force of a tectonic plate shifting beneath their feet. My first step was to secure my destination. I had always dreamed of living somewhere with history, somewhere with character. I spent my evenings researching small cities on the East Coast, places with established museums, libraries, and a sense of permanence. I settled on a city known for its colonial architecture and vibrant art scene, a place far enough away to be a true escape, but not so remote as to feel like exile. I found a small apartment for rent online in a historic brownstone, and after a video call with the landlord, I signed a digital lease and paid the first month's rent and security deposit using the savings I had painstakingly accumulated over the years. This small act of independence, of building a future for myself with my own money, felt incredibly empowering. The next step was the most critical and the most terrifying, the transfer. I knew I couldn't simply walk into a bank and move over $200,000 without raising red flags. I needed a plan that was both legal and discreet. My salvation came from the very document my father had used to betray me, my great-grandfather's trust. The document stipulated that the funds were to be distributed upon our 25th birthdays. I was only 24, but a crucial subclause provided an alternative. It stated that a beneficiary could claim their share earlier for the purposes of education, housing, or establishing a professional career, provided they could demonstrate a sound and viable plan. My signed lease and my existing career as a museum curator were my viable plan. The trust was managed by an independent brokerage firm, the one my father used. He was the account manager, but he wasn't the ultimate authority. The firm this was my opening. I created a new email address, something professional and anonymous. I drafted an email to the trust department of the brokerage firm, bypassing my father entirely. I attached a scanned copy of my driver's license, my birth certificate, the lease agreement for my new apartment, and the key pages of the trust document itself, highlighting the clause about early withdrawal. My email was polite, formal, and direct. I stated my intention to exercise my right as a beneficiary to withdraw my 50% share of the trust's current assets to facilitate my professional relocation and secure housing. I provided the account number for a new, high-yield savings account I had opened online with a completely different bank, one with no physical branches in our state. The entire process was clinical and detached, like writing a condition report for a museum artifact. I hit send, late on a Wednesday afternoon, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew the request would trigger a review process. It would create a paper trail that would lead directly back to my father, but only after the fact. The brokerage firm's compliance department would have no reason to deny a legitimate request from a named beneficiary. Their legal obligation was to the trust, not to my father's secret plans for my sister. The waiting was agonizing. For 2 days, I lived on a knife's edge, checking my new email account compulsively. My parents' chatter about canapés and party favors was a surreal background noise to the silent, high-stakes drama unfolding on my laptop screen. Then, on Friday morning, less than 24 hours before the party, the email arrived. It was from a senior trust officer. It was brief and formal. "Ms. Fiona Weston," it began. "We have received and reviewed your request for distribution. The documentation is in order. As per the terms of the trust, a wire transfer for your 50% share of the assets, totaling $224,850.34, has been initiated to your provided account. Please allow 1-2 business days for the funds to be reflected." I read the email 3 times, the numbers shimmering on the screen. It was done. The money, my money, was moving. It was flowing out of the account my father had hoarded for Jessica and into an account that only I controlled. I felt a dizzying surge of vertigo, a feeling of both terror and triumph. I had done it. I had taken back what was mine. That evening, the house was buzzing with pre-party energy. Jessica was getting a manicure in the living room, my mother was on the phone with the caterer, and my father was in his office, likely doing a final review of his finances before the big weekend. He would be looking at the total balance of his investment portfolio, a number he checked daily. He wouldn't drill down into the details of a specific trust account on a Friday night. He wouldn't notice the massive withdrawal until Monday morning at the earliest, when the transaction settled. By then, I would be long gone. I retreated to my room and began to pack. I took only what mattered: my clothes, my books, a few sentimental items, and my grandmother's letters. I packed my car under the cover of darkness, moving with a quiet efficiency I had learned from my years working in the museum archives. Every box was a step further away from the life I was leaving behind. I felt a pang of sadness, not for the family I was losing, but for the one I never had. I was mourning a ghost. As I placed the last box in my trunk, I looked back at the brightly lit house. It looked like a perfect dollhouse, all of its inhabitants playing their perfect roles. But I knew the truth. It was a house built on a foundation of lies, and I had just pulled out the cornerstone. The entire structure was about to come crashing down. The day of the party was a masterpiece of suburban pageantry. A massive white tent graced the backyard, tables were draped in crisp linens, and champagne was on ice before noon. My mother, Linda, directed the symphony of caterers and florists with the precision of a seasoned conductor, her face alight with triumph. My father, Richard, stood by her side, the proud benefactor of this grand production. Jessica was the star, radiant and glowing, accepting congratulations from the arriving guests with a practiced, regal grace. No one paid any attention to me. I was just part of the scenery, a quiet figure in a simple dress, helping to arrange place cards and refill water glasses. My invisibility had never been a more valuable asset. I moved through the party with a serene sense of detachment, like a visitor from another world. I was already gone. My body was just waiting for the right moment to follow my mind. I found my grandmother Sophia sitting in her usual spot, away from the main crowd, observing the spectacle with an amused, knowing eye. I sat with her, and for a few minutes we didn't speak. We just watched. "You seem different today, Fiona," she finally said, not looking at me but at the milling crowd. "Calm." "I am, Grandma," I replied, my voice steady. "You once told me that history remembers the quiet ones because they're the ones who write it down. I've decided to start writing my own story." She turned to look at me then, her gaze sharp and perceptive. She saw it all in my eyes, the resolve, the plan, the departure. A slow smile spread across her face. She reached out and patted my hand. "Your great-grandfather would be immensely proud," she said softly. "Be safe and be happy." It was not a question or a command. It was a blessing. That was all I needed. I gave her hand a final squeeze and stood up. I made one last circuit of the party, a silent farewell tour. I saw my father boasting about Jessica's business acumen. I saw my mother showing off the new landscaping. I saw Jessica, surrounded by her friends, reenacting the moment she pushed me into the lake, their peals of laughter ringing through the air. They were so absorbed in their own glorious narrative, they didn't even notice me walk back into the house. Inside, the silence was a welcome relief. I went to my room, which was already stripped of my personality, now just a collection of furniture. I had left only one thing behind, sitting on my perfectly made bed, a single, sealed envelope. Inside were two things. The first was a letter. I had rewritten it a dozen times, editing it down until it was as sharp and sterile as a surgeon's scalpel. It read, "Dear Richard, Linda, and Jessica, I am writing this to inform you that I am gone. Please do not try to contact me. This is not a request for attention or a cry for help. It is a statement of fact." The incident at the lake was not a prank. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being treated as secondary, as an afterthought. Your laughter, Jessica, and your silence, Mom and Dad, were more clarifying than you can ever imagine. You showed me my true value in this family, which is to say, I have none. But the real reason for my departure is something more tangible. I know about the inheritance from great-grandfather Weston. I know it was meant for both of us. For my entire adult life, you have allowed me to believe I had nothing, while you cultivated my future to hand it to Jessica. This is not just emotional neglect. It is a profound and calculated betrayal. The second item in the envelope was a single piece of paper, a printout of the account statement. It showed the original balance from the day before, the wire transfer withdrawal of my 50% share, and the new halved balance. I didn't include the trust documents or any further proof. This single page was enough. It was irrefutable. I left the envelope on my pillow, a final, silent statement in a house that had never listened to my voice. Then I picked up my purse, walked down the stairs, and out the front door. No one saw me leave. The sounds of the party, the music, the laughter faded behind me as I got into my packed car. I didn't look back. I drove through the familiar suburban streets for the last time, each turn a definitive step away from my past. I drove for hours, heading east, the setting sun in my rearview mirror. With every mile I put between myself and that house, the weight on my chest lightened. The feeling wasn't elation or joy. It was something quieter, more profound. It was the feeling of air filling my lungs after being held underwater for too long. It was the feeling of peace. I imagined the scene that would unfold the next day. The party would end. The guests would leave. Life would return to normal. Perhaps it would be Monday morning when my father, sipping his coffee and checking the markets, would finally see it. The gaping hole in the account. The frantic search for an explanation. The call to the brokerage firm, who would inform him, in polite, corporate language, that the distribution was made legally to the other beneficiary. Then, the discovery of the letter on my bed. The dawning, horrifying realization. The explosion, the accusations, the perfect family portrait shattered into a million pieces. The thought didn't bring me pleasure. It brought me a sense of grim, quiet justice. They had shoved me into the water and told me not to be dramatic. But the biggest dramas are often the quietest ones, the ones that happen in spreadsheets and farewell notes. They had started a ripple, and now it was a tsunami heading straight for their shore. My new life began in a second-floor apartment in a city that smelled of old brick and salty air. The rooms were small, with high ceilings and wavy, original glass in the windows that made the world outside look like a watercolor painting. For the first week, I did nothing but exist. I bought groceries, I unpacked my books, I walked through the cobblestone streets, and I breathed. The air felt different here, lighter, cleaner. It wasn't weighed down by the unspoken rules and suffocating expectations of my old life. I was anonymous, a person without a past, and the freedom of it was exhilarating. I found a job within a month. It wasn't a curator position, not yet, but it was a start. I was hired as a research assistant at the city's historical society, a place filled with dusty maps, faded photographs, and the quiet, diligent work of preserving stories. It felt like home. My colleagues were kind, passionate people who were interested in my thoughts on archival methods, not my family's pedigree. I was seen for my skills and my knowledge, not for how well I complemented a social setting. I spoke to my grandmother, Sophia, once a week. I had sent her a simple postcard with my new address, and she had called me the day it arrived. Our conversations were a lifeline. She never asked for the sordid details of the fallout. She didn't need to. She simply listened as I talked about my new job, the friends I was making, the strange and wonderful feeling of building a life from scratch. "I got a letter from your father," she told me during one call, her voice neutral. "A rather hysterical one, full of outrage and accusations. He seems to believe you have robbed them." "I only took what was mine, Grandma," I said, my voice calm. "I know, dear," she replied. "And that is what they will never understand. To them, you taking your share feels like a theft because they had already convinced themselves it all belonged to Jessica. Your father is not angry that you took your money. He is angry that you exposed his lie." She told me that Jessica's plans for her prestigious university had been adjusted. With half the fund gone, my parents couldn't afford the exorbitant tuition. She was now enrolled in the local state university, the same one they had deemed not good enough for me. Jessica, I learned, had not taken the news well. The graduation party had been the peak of her life, and the weeks that followed were a steep, humiliating decline. The designer dorm room, the European backpacking trip, the new car, all of it had vanished. According to Sophia, the house was no longer a showroom of perfection. It was a war zone of blame and resentment. Jessica blamed my parents for not protecting her money. My mother blamed my father for his financial carelessness. And my father, unable to admit his own profound dishonesty, blamed me for everything. The quiet, disposable daughter had become the villain of the family tragedy, the architect of their downfall. The irony was not lost on me. I felt a strange sense of pity for them. Their perfect world had been so fragile, built on a foundation of deceit and favoritism. All it took was one person to quietly walk away for the entire structure to collapse. They had lost more than half a college fund. They had lost their narrative, their illusion of the perfect family, and they had no idea how to live without it. One evening, months after I had left, I received an email from an unknown address. The subject line was simply my name. It was from my mother. It was a long, rambling message, a chaotic mix of fury, self-pity, and twisted appeals to emotion. She accused me of being selfish, cruel, and ungrateful. She wrote about how much they had sacrificed for me, how I had torn the family apart over a childish grudge. She ended the email with a single, desperate line: "How could you do this to Jessica? You have ruined her future." I read the email, and I felt nothing. The words that once would have shattered me were now just black text on a white screen. She still didn't get it. She still didn't see me. Her concern wasn't for the daughter she had wronged, but for the consequences her golden child was now facing. I deleted the email without replying. My life continued to move forward. I built friendships. I explored my new city. I excelled at my job. I was saving my money, my rightful inheritance for my own future, a down payment on a small condo, perhaps, or a master's degree. It was my security, my foundation, built not on lies but on quiet, determined action. One afternoon, while archiving a collection of old letters, I came across one written by a woman in the 19th century who had left her family to start a new life on her own. She wrote of her fear, but also of her profound sense of peace. "I have found a shore of my own," she wrote, "a place where the tide is governed not by the pull of others, but by my own moon." I smiled as I read it, a feeling of deep connection spanning across the centuries. I, too, had found my shore. My family was still back on that dock, screaming at the empty water, blaming the tide for their own shipwreck. But I was miles away, in a place where the air was clean and I could finally breathe.